Fortnite's new rocket ram is probably the most fun item I've ever used, but of course, since Epic Games forces casual and competitive playlists to have the exact same loot pool, that means that this is what endgames of tournaments currently look like. Since the item will most likely stay in all playlists, here's how to completely abuse it in pubs, ranked, and tournaments. If you're aiming directly forward, it'll carry a distance of 58 meters. If you look up, it'll go 48 meters up, and as you can see, when you use it, it pushes you into the air already, so there's no need to jump prior to doing this. And actually, this is relatively bad practice, because if you jump prior to doing this, it's easy for you to get shot by other players, whereas if you don't and you're still on the ground, you can still strafe left to right to avoid being shot. Now, the 58 meters I mentioned is only the case when you're looking directly forward. However, if you mark onto a target you want to land on, there are certain lineups that you can use to always ensure you land in that box. Now, as you notice, if you press the alternative fire, you can see where you're going to land, but after a certain distance when you're looking up, you can't actually tell where this is because it's off screen. So if you're 115 meters away from the box and you look at the top of the marker, you will land directly in front of it, breaking the front wall and the cone inside. If you're 110 meters away, you will land on top. Now, as you notice, it didn't break all of the builds, and that's because there's a 450 structure damage, which we'll come back to later, but remember, this is very important. These lineups are holding no buttons, so if you're slightly further away from that, you can actually continue to hold forward and go a slightly further distance, but 110 to 115 meters is basically the sweet spot. And any lineups under 100 meters aren't worth telling you because you can just see it with the alternative fire. Of course, you don't just have to go straight, you can turn in the sky and change directions, which means you can hit people on your way up, turn directions, and then land on them in the way down. If you're directly above them, you can decide how many layers you want to go through. If you look up and fire yourself down, you'll go through the cone and floor on top and land in the box, but if you look straight down, you'll go through the floor, the cone on top, and the floor and the cone on bottom, which if there's a player in this box, will chop them out and knock them down to fall damage. Now, as soon as you click the left trigger, there's a 2-second charge up before you'll actually start to move, and all of the walls around you will actually be destroyed at that moment. This is your entire box and some of the walls outside of that as well, so the explosion damage here is very large. Of course, this leaves you very exposed. As you can see in this clip from a scrim I was playing, a player did this at the backside of zone, and I was easily able to get 195 damage onto them before they lagged through the sky, and I couldn't hit another shot after that. There are two ways that I found to stop being exposed while you do this. If you're sitting in a 1x1, sit at the backside of the cone, as this cone will not get destroyed. Head it out, place a ramp and a cone above it, and as you explode, you'll notice that these 3 build pieces aren't destroyed, and you should have a little bit of cover from the front side. The second way is that you can edit a cone inside or place a ramp inside your box and place a wall up in front of you. These 2 build pieces won't be destroyed, again giving you some further cover from the front. A couple of practical applications for this are just standing on a ramp, looking up, and then shooting forward as you won't destroy it, or you can place a ramp above you and then do it from here to keep more protected from higher angles. The similarity between these two is that you have to look directly up when you click fire, because sometimes if you look in front of you, it will still destroy some of these pieces. When you impact onto a build piece, it will always destroy this no matter what the HP is. However, it'll do 450 structure damage to some of the build pieces around it. Fully built metal has 500 HP, so it actually won't destroy all of these build pieces as we saw in one of the earlier examples. However, if you hit into a wood or brick box, this will completely destroy all of these builds, as each of these build pieces have under 450 HP. Another reason this is so important is that all of the metal builds that aren't destroyed are left at 50 HP or 10 HP if they're a floor, meaning you can break through them with a single pickaxe swing or 2 shots. As we saw earlier, if you're 58 to 59 meters away, you'll hit the wall in front of a box and fully destroy the wall and cone on the inside, dealing 450 structure damage to everything else around it. However, if you're 60 meters away, you're just going to slow down just before you hit the wall and not actually do any damage, which may be useful if your teammates are inside a box and you want to rotate to them without destroying all of the builds that they're inside of. You can also, whilst flying, if you're hovering around the ground level, look down and you'll touch the floor on the way past and you'll slow down, not destroying any of the build pieces that you end up touching. This is also true if you're on a flat surface and you aim your crosshair towards the low point of a box. You're not going to travel as far as you'll end up sliding along the ground. With this in mind, if you're 28 meters away, you can look down into the bottom of the box and you'll slide straight through into the backside without destroying any of the back walls, phasing in every single time. From that 58 meter mark, if you hit the center of the wall, it will damage 3 tiles wide and 2 tiles deep. which remember, if this is wood or brick, will completely destroy all of these weakened builds because they're under 450 structure damage. But if you go between two walls, this will go 4 tiles wide rather than 3 tiles wide. If you hit into the edge of the box, you'll break the walls and the cone inside, but if you hit the top corner, you're going to destroy the walls and then the top cone. If you hit a box from below, you're going to destroy every single build up to 48 meters, which is a great way to drop players down in duos. And you can do this to destroy people's towers because the initial impact damage has such a large radius, it'll most likely destroy all of the walls that they're built on. And if you look up, you're most likely to hit them on the way up as well. You'll notice that if you're flying straight, towards the end, you start to slow down. And in this period, you'll actually still break through all of the metal walls that are in front of you. However, if you put a ramp out here, for some reason, the rocket ram breaks this, but you stop going forward. It's not that you can't break through ramps, as I broke through tons here, but right at the end, when you slow down, that's when a ramp will stop you. The reason this is important is because in end games, you'll notice in this clip that Archie fires forward just fine, but I start flying up and end up hitting a ramp and fall down into a box at the backside and then end up dying because of the heisted breacher shotgun. So if there's any ramps that are very far away from you and you may think, oh, I'll just break through this, chances are you probably won't. I've tested a couple methods to see if you could counter the rocket ram by turbo building a ramp inside of your box, but it seems like this only works if you're over 40 meters away using the rocket ram, and if they're any closer than that, it doesn't really make a difference as you still fly through the box anyway. The only way I've seen to actually counter this at all is that if you sit inside a cone inside your box and a player lands on top of it, you will not be damaged through this. However, this cone will be left at 10 HP or 50 HP, which means that that player can just phase straight into your box and pick up an easy elim. If you directly hit players whilst on a high layer, you may also knock them off the edge, so something that can be done on Loot Island or the edge of a cliff. The easiest way to obtain one of the rocket rams is from the heisted bag, as there's actually a 57.14% chance of these spawning here. Thank you to Osirian for the stats. From a chest, there's only a 6.3% spawn rate and only a 1.75% spawn rate on floor loot. Now, there is a lot of other uses for this in-game other than just fighting. For example, if you're playing with Koji Boop a lot, you're probably going to need to reboot him constantly. And this is a great way in early game to just leave the POI and get to the nearest reboot van. And on the flip side of that, if another team is rebooting, you can also use this to disrupt this, as if you land on the box where the reboot is, it'll disrupt them from actually rebooting and cancel it out. Whilst fighting teams in the early and mid game, you can also use this to fly straight through their box to the other side to create a pinch where one player is on one side and one player is on the other, and you just spray back into the center. Of course, if you're doing this in the early game, this will also waste a bunch of their mats, and chances are they probably won't have that many already. It's also very difficult to track players using this. As you can see in this clip, I tried to go down using my rocket ram to hit a player that I know is weak, but he goes up and I think we collide. I'm not entirely sure what happens here, and then I just die because he's below me. And of course, the best way to use this during fights is for multiple people, if you're playing duos or squads, to use it at the exact same time and land all on the same target. There's almost no way to counter this outside of constantly looking up to the sky and beaming every single player that you see using the rocket ram. Now, with the new Twin Mag AR, it's actually very easy to beam players out of the sky because they don't move as fast as you may think. So typically when you're using this in a tournament match, you're going to want to make sure you aim relatively horizontally and don't fire that high into the sky, as your game could end before you even end up landing. You can do this in areas where you can cut line of sight by using hills just to rotate around these, and this is definitely the safest way to use this as a mobility item rather than for fighting. I would say though, in extremely laggy lobbies, when you use it through the sky, it's almost impossible to hit you during the 6th, 7th and 8th zones, so if you think it's worth it, you can take a calculated risk here. In tournaments, it's also very difficult to get up onto Loot Island, as you're always the focus of the teams around you. However, using the rocket ram, you can build up a few layers to ensure you're less than 48 meters away from it, and once it spawns, you can then use the rocket ram to fire yourself up onto the island and be the first team to land up there. Now, since most of the moving zones are under a minute, and this has a 25-second cooldown time, you have to be relatively calculated on when you're going to use it in order to be able to use it twice during each rotation. What's going to be extremely important this season is making sure you're the last person to use the rocket ram so that nobody lands on top of your head. Since it has the 25-second cooldown, most players will probably use it roughly around the same time. So at the start of each moving zone, chances are you could tarp a little bit on the dead side to keep away from the players knocking you down. In particular, if you stay in a low layer like low ground, you're going to keep away from everyone, then rocket ram last once everyone's used this. Or you could tank some whites using, say, a slurp juice or a med mist or floppers, which you can get very easily this season, and then use the rocket ram after that to be the last person in the sky, ensuring no one will land on your head. Next video I've got out is going to be a complete breakdown of this season's meta, so like, subscribe, keep tuned in for that, and click whatever video I got on screen right now. Peace.